Imagine getting a $20,000 raise, only to feel just as broke a year later. It sounds impossible, but it happens every single day. Some people earn twice as much as they did 5 years ago, yet they still check their bank account before buying groceries. They still feel anxious when an unexpected bill arrives, and they still find themselves counting the days until the next paycheck. So here's a question. What if the problem was never your salary? What if earning more money isn't what creates wealth? What if the real difference happens in the first few hours after payday? Let me tell you about two people. Michael earns $100,000 a year. On paper, he's successful. He pulls into his driveway in a new SUV. The garage door closes behind him. His smartwatch lights up with another subscription payment. His credit card quietly covers dinner, streaming services, a new gadget he barely remembers ordering. Nothing feels expensive because everything happens automatically. From the outside, Michael looks like he's winning, but every month ends the same way. He opens his banking app, looks at the balance, and thinks, where did it all go? Now meet Daniel. Daniel earns just $55,000 a year. His car has over 150,000 miles on it. He still carries a small notebook in his backpack. Every payday, before he spends a single dollar, he quietly moves a little money into savings. When something breaks, he asks if it can be repaired before replacing it. When everyone else upgrades, he waits. Not because he has to, because he chooses to. 5 years later, Michael still looks wealthier. Daniel actually is. One spent money building an image. The other spent money building freedom. One kept increasing his lifestyle. The other kept increasing his options. And that's the difference most people never see. Income decides how fast money comes into your life, but your system decides whether it stays. That's what this video is really about. Not secret investments. Not getting rich overnight. Not working 80 hours a week. Instead, we're going to explore 8 timeless ideas inspired by traditional Japanese money habits. Ideas that teach you to see your money before it disappears. Protect it before life spends it for you. Stop wasting the value you already own. Stop buying things just to impress people who won't pay your bills. Build skills that become more valuable with time. Give wealth the patience it needs to grow. Improve your financial life one small step at a time. And finally, learn the question that may be more valuable than asking how to earn another dollar. How much is enough? Now, to be fair, this isn't about pretending Japan has everything figured out. Japan has debt, consumer pressure, rising living costs, financial stress, just like everywhere else. These aren't magic rules. They're old principles that have quietly helped many people think differently about money. And the first one is more than 100 years old. It begins with something so simple that most people overlook it: a notebook. But what you write beside each purchase may reveal something far more valuable than the price itself. The first secret is called Kakeibo. At first glance, it doesn't look impressive. No fancy app, no AI, no investment strategy, just a notebook. Honestly, if someone handed you one today and said, "This could change your financial life," you might laugh. But that's exactly why Kakeibo has survived for more than 100 years, because it solves a problem that technology never really did. Think about how money moves today. Your paycheck arrives through direct deposit. Your bills are paid automatically. You tap your phone for coffee. You click one button, and a package is already on its way. Subscriptions quietly renew while you're asleep. Buy now, pay later lets you enjoy something today and worry about it months from now. Money moves constantly, but you hardly ever feel it moving. Spending has become almost invisible. And when something becomes invisible, it becomes very difficult to control. Kakeibo deliberately slows everything down, not because writing is magical, because slowing down is. Instead of letting your bank statement tell your story at the end of the month, you write it yourself. You write down what came in. You write down what went out. You look at where every dollar actually went. And before buying something, you pause long enough to ask 4 simple questions. Can I live without this? Can I afford it? Will I actually use it? And maybe the most important question of all, how do I feel right now? That last question surprises people, because most of us think spending is a math problem. Very often, it's an emotional one. Have you ever bought something after a stressful day, ordered takeout even though there was food at home, filled an online shopping cart late at night when you couldn't sleep, bought something because everyone else seemed to have it? Those decisions rarely begin with money. They begin with feelings. Bored, lonely, overwhelmed, trying to reward yourself, trying to feel successful, trying not to feel left behind. Kakeibo quietly exposes those patterns. You may discover that you weren't buying another coffee. You were buying a few minutes of comfort. You weren't buying another jacket. You were buying confidence before an important meeting. You weren't paying for convenience. You were paying for relief. And once you can see that pattern, you finally have something you can change. Here's something I'd like you to try. For the next 7 days, don't create a budget. Don't cut your spending. Don't judge yourself. Just carry a notebook. Every time money leaves your pocket, write down 4 things. What you bought, how much it cost, how you were feeling, and tomorrow, ask yourself one simple question. Was it still worth it? That's all. No guilt, no shame, just curiosity. Because a budget tells you where your money should go. Kakeibo helps you understand why it went somewhere else. And once your money becomes visible, the next challenge isn't seeing it. It's protecting it before the rest of life quietly takes it away. Now that you can finally see where your money goes, there's one more problem. Seeing it doesn't stop it from disappearing. Because the moment your paycheck arrives, something else arrives too. Rent, the mortgage, utilities, insurance, credit card payments, groceries, gas, streaming subscriptions you forgot you even had. Before you know it, the money is gone. And if anything survives at the end of the month, that's what most people call savings. It sounds logical. Live first, save whatever is left. But here's the problem. There is almost never anything left. Because spending has a strange habit. It quietly expands to match whatever income you have. Give someone a bigger paycheck, and life often finds a way to become more expensive. A nicer apartment, a newer car, more dinners out, better vacations, bigger monthly payments. Not because people are irresponsible, because humans naturally adjust to whatever feels normal. Japanese households have long practiced something called Sakidori Chokin. The idea is surprisingly simple. When your paycheck arrives, you don't ask, how much can I save this month? You ask, how much will I save before this month even begins? The money moves first, not last, even if it's only $5, $10. 1% of your paycheck, a tiny transfer after every payday, or part of every raise before you ever get used to spending it. The amount is not the most important part. The order is. Because something unexpected happens the moment you save first. Your brain quietly begins telling a different story. Instead of saying, I'll save if I have anything left, it starts saying, I'm someone who keeps part of what I earn. That sounds like a small difference. It isn't. People rarely change because of one big decision. They change because a new identity slowly becomes normal. And once that identity feels natural, saving stops feeling like a sacrifice. It simply becomes part of who you are. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. What if I'm barely paying rent? What if groceries already stretch my budget? What if I'm choosing between medication and saving? Those are real situations. This isn't about pretending financial hardship doesn't exist. If every dollar is already committed to essential needs, don't put yourself in danger trying to follow a rule. Start where your reality allows. $5, $10, 1%. The goal isn't impressing anyone. The goal is proving to yourself that your future deserves a place in every paycheck. As that habit grows, give every saved dollar a purpose. Think of it as 3 separate homes. The first is your emergency fund, money that protects you when life refuses to go according to plan. The second is for future goals, a home, education, travel, starting a business, something you're moving toward. The third is long-term investing, money that has one job, to quietly grow while you live your life. If you're starting from zero, build the emergency fund first, because it's difficult to invest confidently when one unexpected expense can destroy your entire plan. Here's the shift I'd like you to remember. The amount builds the account. The order builds the habit. And habits are what eventually build wealth. Protecting part of your paycheck is powerful. But even protected money can slowly disappear if everyday waste keeps quietly draining everything else. And that's exactly what the next Japanese principle was designed to prevent. Now that you've protected part of your paycheck, there's another leak most people never notice. It isn't hidden in their bank account. It's hidden in perfectly good things they stop valuing. In Japan, there's a beautiful word for this, Mottainai. There isn't a perfect English translation, but it describes that quiet feeling of regret when something valuable is wasted before its value has truly been used. At first, it sounds like it's only about objects, a shirt, a phone, a chair, a kitchen appliance. But Mottainai is really about something much bigger. It's about respecting the value you've already paid for. Think about the world we live in today. A new phone comes out, even though yours still works. A new fashion trend appears, even though your closet is already full. A newer car, a newer watch, a newer version of almost everything. We're constantly encouraged to replace things not because they stopped working, but because something newer exists. Mottainai asks a different question. Has this thing truly given me all the value I paid for? That's a very different way of thinking, because every upgrade carries 2 prices. The first price is obvious. It's the money you spend today. The second price is invisible. It's the freedom that money could have created tomorrow. Imagine someone replacing a perfectly good smartphone every single year. One phone won't make them poor. One decision almost never changes a financial life. But repeat that habit for 20 or 30 years, and suddenly you're not talking about one phone anymore. You're talking about tens of thousands of dollars that never had the chance to grow. That's how wealth quietly disappears. Not through one dramatic mistake. Through small decisions repeated so often, they begin to feel normal. But here's something important. Mottainai does not mean keeping everything forever. A garage full of broken electronics. Closets packed with clothes you never wear. Drawers filled with tangled cables, just in case. That isn't respect for resources. That's simply another form of waste. Instead, think of every possession as having a life cycle. First, use it. Take care of it. Repair it if it still serves a purpose. Give it a new use if you can. Sell it. Donate it. And when it has truly reached the end of its useful life, let it go responsibly. Before replacing something that still works, try one simple experiment. Wait 72 hours. During those 3 days, ask yourself 4 questions. How often do I actually use this? What does this cost me every time I use it? Does the new version solve a real problem? Or am I simply excited because it's new? And finally, could repairing this give it another year of life? Those questions won't stop every purchase. They aren't supposed to. They're simply designed to slow down the automatic part of your brain, because once spending stops being automatic, it starts becoming intentional. Here's the shift I'd like you to remember. Saving doesn't always begin by owning less. Sometimes it begins by wasting less of what you've already paid for. And while wasting useful objects can quietly drain your future, there is one form of waste that's even more expensive: spending money to control what other people think of you. And that's where the next Japanese principle takes us. Now let's talk about one of the most expensive habits people never put on a budget: trying to look successful. There is a huge difference between looking wealthy and being financially secure. From the outside, they can look exactly the same: a luxury SUV, a beautiful house, designer clothes, the newest watch, the latest phone. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. That expensive car may be financed, the watch may be sitting on a credit card, the house may come with a mortgage so large that every unexpected expense creates anxiety. Sometimes what looks like wealth is simply stress wearing a very expensive outfit. That's why many people describe real wealth as something you can't always see: money quietly invested, debt quietly disappearing, choices quietly increasing. This idea is often called stealth wealth, not because wealthy people are hiding, but because they no longer need their possessions to introduce them. Here's a question I'd like you to remember. Would you still buy it if no one else could ever see it? Take a moment. Really think about it. If nobody knew what car you drove, what shoes you wore, what logo was on your bag, would you still choose the same thing? That question separates enjoyment from approval. Because there is nothing wrong with owning beautiful things. There is nothing wrong with luxury. There is nothing wrong with celebrating your success. Stealth wealth is not about pretending money doesn't matter. It simply asks that your purchases match your reality. Luxury should be the result of wealth, not the substitute for it. The truth is, status spending rarely begins with the object itself. It usually begins with a feeling: the fear of looking unsuccessful, the pressure of comparing yourself with friends, the desire to prove you finally made it, trying to erase memories of difficult years, or quietly hoping that people will see you differently. We've all felt those emotions in one way or another. The problem is that approval has no finish line. Today's luxury becomes tomorrow's normal. The car becomes ordinary. The watch loses its excitement. The compliments disappear. And suddenly another purchase seems necessary. Not because your life changed, because your expectations did. Before making any purchase mainly for status, try asking yourself 4 simple questions. Would I still want this without the logo? Would I buy it if I had to pay cash instead of financing it? Does this purchase move an important goal further away? Am I buying usefulness, enjoyment, or approval? Those questions won't eliminate every luxury purchase. They shouldn't. The goal isn't guilt. The goal is awareness, because every dollar spent trying to prove success is one less dollar quietly creating it. Spending less on appearances protects the money you already earn, but building lasting wealth also requires increasing what you're capable of earning, and that's where the next Japanese idea becomes so powerful. So far, we've talked about protecting the money you already earn, but eventually, every financial system reaches the same question. How do you increase your income? without destroying yourself in the process? Most career advice sounds almost identical. Work harder, take every opportunity, climb faster, earn more. And for a while, that can absolutely work. Until one day you realize something. You built a bigger paycheck, but a smaller life. You're making more money than ever, yet you're exhausted. Your weekends disappear. Your health starts slipping. Your family sees less of you. And somehow, the promotion you worked so hard for begins to feel like another bill you have to pay. That's where another Japanese idea offers a very different perspective. Ikigai. In the West, it's often described as finding your purpose. That's part of it. But financially speaking, Ikigai asks a much more practical question. Not, what's the highest paying job I can get? Instead, what valuable skill can I keep improving for years without burning myself out? Because wealth isn't built during one incredible year. It's built during 10 ordinary years that you were able to keep going. Look at almost any long-term professional, a great salesperson, a skilled nurse, an experienced engineer, a trusted accountant, a software developer, a teacher, a designer, a master electrician. What makes them valuable isn't one extraordinary month. It's thousands of ordinary days. One conversation, one project, one lesson, one client, one improvement at a time. Until one day, people aren't paying for their time anymore. They're paying for their experience. And here's something many people misunderstand. You don't have to stay loyal to one company forever. Changing employers can be smart. Negotiating better pay is smart. Moving into a better industry can be smart. Taking on bigger responsibilities can be smart. Your loyalty doesn't belong to a company. It belongs to your craft. Keep improving the skill. The company can change. The skill stays with you. If you're unsure whether you're building the right career, ask yourself 3 simple questions. What skill do I want people to remember me for? Can I still imagine myself improving this skill 5 or 10 years from now? Will people still be willing to pay for this skill in the future? If the answer is yes, you're building something that compounds. Now, let's be clear about one thing. Ikigai does not mean staying in a job that is destroying your health. It doesn't mean accepting exploitation, living with constant burnout, working somewhere unsafe, or convincing yourself that suffering is somehow noble. That's not mastery, that's survival. The goal isn't endless sacrifice. The goal is sustainable excellence. Because your career doesn't become more valuable simply because you stay busy. It becomes more valuable when today's work makes tomorrow's version of you more skilled than today's. That's how careers compound. And when your earning power keeps growing alongside your financial habits, something remarkable begins to happen. Your income grows, your savings grow, your opportunities grow, but there's still one danger left. One reckless financial decision can erase years of patient progress. And that's exactly why the next principle matters so much. By now, you've probably noticed something. None of these Japanese ideas promise overnight wealth. And that's exactly why they work. Today, we're surrounded by stories of people getting rich almost instantly. A stock doubles overnight. A cryptocurrency suddenly explodes. Someone turns a side hustle into $1 million business. A lottery winner becomes headline news. Social media celebrates the extraordinary. It rarely shows the ordinary years that came before. The problem isn't that extraordinary success never happens. It does. The problem is believing that extraordinary success is the normal path. Because once you start chasing shortcuts, patience begins to feel like failure. But wealth rarely arrives like a lightning strike. More often, it grows like a snowball rolling downhill, slow at first, almost invisible. then larger, then heavier, until eventually, it seems almost impossible to stop. Not because it moved quickly, because nothing interrupted it. That's one of the most important lessons long-term investors ever learn. The first job of investing isn't making money. It's staying in the game long enough to let time do its work. Many people think risk simply means losing money. But that's only part of the story. The greatest financial risk is being forced out of the game altogether. Selling investments because you lost your job. Emptying your retirement account to cover an emergency. Taking on debt because one unexpected expense left you with no safety net. Starting over after one mistake erased 10 years of progress. Those are the risks that quietly destroy wealth. Long-term thinking doesn't mean avoiding every risk. In fact, there are risks in being too careful. Keeping all your savings in cash while inflation slowly reduces its value. Staying in a career that's disappearing, depending on only one paycheck. Never investing because you're afraid of making a mistake. Playing it so safe that time quietly passes you by. The goal isn't zero risk. The goal is survivable risk. Never make one decision that can remove you from the game. That means protecting the foundation before chasing growth. Build an emergency fund. Control high-interest debt. Protect yourself with the insurance you truly need. Invest consistently. Diversify instead of betting everything on one idea. And only increase risk when you understand it. And when you can afford to survive if you're wrong. Think about it this way. The investor who earns 12% one year, then loses everything the next, doesn't beat the investor who quietly earns 8% for 30 years. Consistency almost always defeats intensity. When time is long enough, here's the shift I'd like you to remember. Boring is not the opposite of successful. Boring is often what success looks like. Before enough time has passed for anyone to notice. Patience allows wealth to compound. But patience is difficult if every month feels like starting over. That's why the next Japanese principle isn't about making bigger changes. It's about making smaller ones. Consistently. By now, you may be thinking, this all sounds great, but changing my financial life still feels overwhelming. And that's exactly why the next Japanese idea matters so much. Kaizen. Most people try to change their lives the way people make New Year's resolutions. On Monday, everything changes. No more eating out, no more impulse spending, a perfect budget, save half the paycheck, start investing, start a side business, wake up at 5 in the morning, become a completely different person over one weekend. For a few days, motivation carries them. Then real life shows up. Work gets stressful, the kids get sick, an unexpected bill arrives, energy disappears. The plan falls apart, and people blame themselves. But maybe the problem was never a lack of discipline. Maybe the plan was simply too big to survive real life. That's the idea behind Kaizen. Instead of changing everything, improve one small part of the system. Cancel one subscription you never use. Save $5 more than last month. Cook one extra meal at home this week. Make one additional payment toward a debt. Wait 24 hours before buying something on impulse. Increase your retirement contribution by just 1%. None of those changes feels dramatic. That's exactly the point. People often talk about becoming 1% better every day. It's a helpful idea. But real life doesn't improve like a perfectly smooth graph. Some days you move forward, some days nothing changes. Some days success simply means avoiding a mistake that would have pushed you backward. Some months you save more. Other months, the victory is simply avoiding new debt. The lesson isn't the exact percentage. The lesson is that small improvements become powerful when they survive long enough to repeat themselves. There's another side of Kaizen that people often overlook. Improvement isn't always about doing more. Sometimes it's about making life easier, automating one bill, removing one unnecessary expense, creating one financial rule you no longer have to think about, or simply making your next mistake a little less expensive than your last one. That's progress too. At the end of every month, don't ask, "How can I completely change my financial life?" Ask something much smaller. What's one change that would make next month slightly easier than this one? Small questions often create lasting answers. Here's the idea I'd like you to remember. Don't try to become a completely different person overnight. Become slightly harder to bankrupt every month, because wealth rarely grows through dramatic breakthroughs. It usually grows through ordinary decisions, repeated long enough to become automatic. But even improvement has a hidden danger. If you never decide what enough looks like, you'll spend your whole life improving without ever feeling like you've arrived. And that's exactly what the final Japanese principle helps us understand. We've talked about earning, saving, protecting, investing, improving, but eventually, every financial journey arrives at one final question. How much is enough? Most people never answer it, and that's exactly why they spend their entire lives chasing a finish line that keeps moving. Think about how often this happens. You finally get the raise you've been waiting for. For a little while, life feels easier. Then something changes. The apartment gets bigger. The car gets newer. Vacations become more expensive. Small luxuries quietly become expectations. Before long, the raise no longer feels like progress. It simply becomes your new normal, and the chase begins again. This is one of the greatest financial traps of modern life. Not because earning more is bad, but because every increase in income quietly teaches your lifestyle to become more expensive. Japanese culture has a simple idea for escaping that trap. Taru wo Shiru. It roughly means knowing what is enough. At first, that sounds almost disappointing, as if ambition itself were the problem. But that's not what this idea teaches. Taru wo Shiru doesn't ask you to dream smaller. It asks you to define the destination before you start running. Because if you never decide what enough looks like, advertising will decide for you. Social media will decide for you. Comparison will decide for you. Lifestyle inflation will decide for you. And no matter how much money you earn, it will never feel like enough. Here's another way to think about wealth. Part of wealth is simply the distance between two numbers. The money you earn and the money you truly need to live a secure and meaningful life. You can widen that gap in two ways. Earn more or need less to feel complete. The strongest financial lives usually do both. Here's a simple exercise. Instead of chasing one giant number, define 4 smaller ones. The first is enough for essentials. How much do you need every month for housing, food, transportation, healthcare, utilities, and the bills that absolutely must be paid? The second is enough for safety. How much would allow you to sleep peacefully if your car broke down, if you lost your job, or if life surprised you tomorrow? The third is enough for comfort, not luxury, comfort. The amount that lets you enjoy a vacation now and then, spend time with family, pursue hobbies, live without constant financial anxiety. And finally, enough for freedom, the number that gives you choices. The freedom to leave a job that's hurting your health, to spend more time with your children, to care for your parents, to work because you want to, not because you're trapped. That's a very different definition of wealth. Now, let's go back to Michael and Daniel. Remember them? 5 years later, Michael still earns more. He still drives the nicer car. He still looks wealthier. But Daniel knows something Michael never stopped chasing. He knows where his money goes. He knows what he's building. He knows what matters. And most importantly, he knows what enough looks like. His salary didn't suddenly become extraordinary. His financial system did. And once you see all 8 of these Japanese ideas together, you realize they were never 8 separate money tips. They were one quiet path, from confusion to clarity, from reacting to choosing, from chasing appearances to building freedom. Here's the thought I'd like to leave you with. Enough is a number you define. Before advertising, comparison, and lifestyle inflation define it for you. Because knowing enough doesn't kill ambition. It simply stops ambition from owning your life. If there's one mistake I'd like you to avoid after watching this video, it's trying to change all 8 habits tomorrow morning. That would completely miss the point of everything we've talked about. Because the final lesson hidden inside all of these Japanese ideas is surprisingly simple. Small changes that survive always beat big changes that don't. So don't start with 8 habits. Start with 1. For the next 7 days, I'd like you to carry something very ordinary. A notebook. Every time money leaves your hands, write down 4 things. What you bought, how much it cost, 1 word describing how you felt. And tomorrow, ask yourself one simple question. Was it still worth it? That's it. No complicated spreadsheet, no impossible budget, no guilt, no trying to become a different person by Monday morning. Just pay attention, because awareness always comes before change. At the end of those 7 days, don't ask yourself whether you succeeded. Ask yourself 3 better questions. What spending surprised me the most? What emotion showed up again and again? And what's one small leak I can reduce next week? Then choose just one more habit. Maybe you automate a small savings transfer. Maybe you wait before buying something new. Maybe you cancel one subscription you've forgotten about. Maybe you finally decide what enough means for you. One step, then another. That's how systems are built, and that's how lives quietly change. Think back to Michael and Daniel. Neither of them became wealthy because of one perfect decision. Neither of them changed their lives in a single weekend. The difference was much smaller than that. One built habits that quietly supported his future. The other built a lifestyle that quietly consumed it. 5 years later, those tiny daily decisions had become 2 completely different lives. That's the real lesson. Wealth is rarely created by one brilliant moment. It's usually created by thousands of ordinary decisions, made when nobody is watching. So before you close this video, I'd like you to remember one sentence. Income sets the speed. Your system sets the direction. And even a modest income, moving in the right direction, for a long enough time, can take you somewhere extraordinary. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Don't tell me which habit sounded the smartest. Tell me which one your life actually needs. Comment just one number, from 1 to 8, and tell us why. Because someone reading your comment might realize they're not struggling alone. And if you'd like to turn these 8 ideas into a simple routine you can actually follow, watch the next video. We'll spend 30 days putting these principles into practice, one small step at a time, because lasting change never begins with doing everything. It begins with doing one small thing, long enough for it to become who you are.